Hello, I'm Grant, and welcome to Second Plate. Today, I wanted to make something that's a little bit fun, kind of just like it's a neat thing. So tonight we're going to be making chicken tenderloins on top of zucchini noodles, or zoodles, which if you don't know is basically I'm going to be taking these zucchini and squash and running it through a spiralizer to make noodles. They function just like any other noodle, but since they are all just like one zucchini, it drastically cuts down the calories, and it's just a really kind of neat dish. It's not the most straightforward thing, but it's really kind of cool because like once like I have this, because my girlfriend actually got it, and I tried it and just like, oh, I use it all the time. It's just neat, especially like right now in the summer when things are kind of in season. It's a nice way to really try some new things. So I'm Grant, this is Second Plate, and let's get cooking. I'm going to start by going through some of the ingredients I have here. So I have chicken tenderloins, I have a summer squash, a zucchini, some grape tomatoes, shallots, and mozzarella, as well as my spices. I'm going to start off by actually doing the zoodles, because normally I would do this beforehand. Plus, this can go many different ways based off of basically how this wants to get chopped. It's a very chaotic process, but I like to get it done ahead of time because then I can actually not have to worry about it. So I'm going to slice this. I don't know what was going on at my grocery store, why they had only absolutely massive zucchinis, but I'm going to actually chop this. Let me actually quarter this to make it fit in a little bit easier. Start with it. So basically what it does is it has a blade on the inside that just kind of curves around, and when I put these in, it's going to slowly chop various noodles basically out of this, and that's going to be the basis of the dish. Generally, I'll go through and see which ones came out the best, because as you'll see, like sometimes you'll just get a bad zucchini cutting, or you're like, oh, this one works, but other ones are just kind of shredded. There's no easy way to do this, but it's just something that's kind of cool. It's actually probably the most fun part of the dish. There we go. Again, very chaotic process because it's just trying to get any like purchase it can, and you can just see it like grabbing and pulling. So I'm basically just trying to force this down in here until we get the noodles to kind of come out. There's usually a fair bit of excess, which isn't a big deal, especially considering I have so much zucchini right now. And you can use zucchini or squash. I'm going to use the other one here in a second. They're basically the same. I just like the color difference. I have found, though, that since I was using this thing, since it's such a intricate device, I always had to make a point to like do a whole bunch at once for several recipes, because that's the only way it's worth cleaning this thing. But ignoring that, we have our jar of zoodles. So these are pretty nice. This is actually a really good length. Sometimes you'll get ones that are just like these really long like spirals, and those work. Generally, this is where I'd pick out any that are maybe like just a little bit too long or like really odd. Like sometimes you just get chaotic results. But honestly, this is probably the best looking batch I've had out of all of these. So I'm just gonna go set this alongside with the rest of our ingredients. I think I got plenty, so I probably don't even need to worry about the summer squash itself, because that's probably gonna be enough for a recipe. Yeah. So I just have chicken tenderloins here. I'm going to go ahead and salt and season these before I get them cooking. Now that we've actually had those ready, the process for this is pretty simple. I'm going to cook the chicken, then slowly add in my seasoning and my tomatoes, and then at the very end, I'm going to add in the zoodles, because since they are vegetables, you don't want to have them in too long because they will kind of cook down. Similar to, like, say, if you were to cook, like, say, spinach. You lose a lot of mass as the water leaves. So these are chicken tenderloin. They're all split like this, so I just like to season them kind of as a group first. And then I'm just going to cut them horizontally. Put a little bit of this on. I have oregano and red pepper flakes. I'm going to season a little bit with the oregano here, but mainly I'm going to be putting it on like after. So I'm just going to make some cuts for my chicken to get some nice little cubes. I have always cooked it in the pan every time I've made this dish, But I suppose you could also just toss this into an oven and then kind of combine it afterwards, particularly if you're probably doing way more. But what I kind of like about this is if you already have the zoodles pre-made, it's kind of like just a one-dish recipe, which is a big deal. Like if you can have your one skillet recipe, it just makes the logistics of the dish so much easier. So I'm just going to clean off my hands and this knife and re-season now that I have access to basically the inner parts of the chicken. I think I'm definitely going through like a phase where I'm using a ton of pepper. It's just been like, every time I notice I'm seasoning, I'm putting on more and more. So we're gonna start this, about like medium. Let's put on some olive oil and let this start grilling. Spread this around. Cool. I will be making this to be fairly spicy. That's why I use the red pepper flakes. Something about the show has definitely gotten me more into like spicy food, but you can kind of season it a little bit differently depending on how you want the dish to come out. I've also done stuff with lemons. That's something I would also recommend. It's very good. You can go for, assume for more like a barbecue thing, just any way you would season chicken. Basically, the noodles are just going to be there to kind of soak up whatever sauces you make. So this is something where I'm specifically making it with this chicken and these specific spices and all that. But really, you can use this pretty much anywhere you would use pasta where you would also have vegetables. So like I wouldn't use them for spaghetti because that would be just kind of odd. But any time you would say like have just other pastas, you could basically substitute these and it's pretty nice. Going to start slowly scooping up some of this chicken and getting it in here. It's a nice sizzle. Perfect. Looking at this, I'm mainly also looking for anything like this right here, where you can see there's parts that aren't seasoned yet because I didn't flip the chicken. And I'm just going to make sure I kind of get those before it gets too much. Salt. Now, I'm not doing it here, but the other meat, I guess you could say, that was always recommended with this was shrimp. And I'm personally not a huge fan of shrimp. I like seafood, but shrimp was never like that big of a deal for me. But that's another great thing to kind of just add to this in addition or in replacement to the chicken. Cool. So I'm just gonna keep stirring this around. You can see it start cooking up pretty quick. This is chicken, so I will not be tempting it because you generally, like you'll see it's gonna be done and then we have to cook it even longer with the zoodles. But do make sure everything's getting cooked through. I think when you're cooking it like this, it could be easy to have, so say like a good thick chunk like this. You leave it on this side, you flip it over, you get the other side. But because it's the thickest chunk, you might not think to like test that specific one and you could end up with some pink. So I just try to make sure like each one is in contact. There's not one that's like sitting on one side for too long. And I want it to be hot, but hot enough that, not so hot that it's going to be burnt on the outside before it can cook through. Cool. Going to add some shallots. Next, red pepper. I like to have it in here when it's actually sauteing and cooking, as opposed to when it's on the side. Like I feel like I've seen people use hot pepper flakes similar to pepper, but I've personally enjoyed cooking it more like you would onions. Like you get in there and you are sauteing the red pepper flakes, not that you're, say, putting it on something that's already cooked. You can do that, and that's usually one thing I will vary. Like I'll say, okay, you know what, I want to get in and add more now that I cooked it, but I want to get it in there early. This is just me going piece by piece, making sure everything's looking good, because you can still see, like, if I separate some of this, you still got some like pink on this piece, and that's just what I'm looking for to make sure it's that one individually needs to get flipped, if it'll let me. Just gonna press these down so they get seared. And then we're gonna keep adding. Okay, next thing is I just have some cherry tomatoes. Honestly, like the cherry tomatoes, they look good and they're easy to grab, but personally, I think tomato wedges would come out just a little bit better in this case. But I like this. You can section them if you want, do into quarters, but I feel like if I'm going to use cherry tomatoes, I want the whole cherry tomato. Just makes it look good. Cool. Perfect. We're going to add a little bit of chicken stock now and a little bit more with the zoodles. One thing that I have to call out with working with the zoodles is, unlike regular pasta, they have water in them already because they're, vegetables. So I'm adding some of this now because I need to be able to tell if I'm going to have too much water or just liquid later on. So let this kind of dissolve in here. And normally if you were to make, say, something where that occurs where there's too much liquid, you could just reduce it. But again, our zoodles are already going to be reduced, so I don't want to cook them too long because they will start to just break down. Like for the same reason you normally cook vegetables, you want them to kind of break down so you can digest them and eat them. Well, with our zoodles, we want them to be hot and like soaked in sauces, but I don't want it to just be like come down to just a fleshy vegetable mass. I want them to actually be noodles. It's looking pretty good here. Again, I'm just trying to be very thorough that I'm going through like each piece, like good, good, good. And that's something I just want to call out and why I said like it's probably not even a bad idea to just bake it if you are okay using that extra pan. Because then you can just pull it out, temp it, slice it, probably even like let it cool down a little bit, and then when you make the zoodles, toss it back in the pan to heat it up. But that way you know it's completely good. You're not going to get like say salmonella or something. Generally shooting for like 165. So I'm actually going to see if I can cut in there. Yeah, looks like these are all done, or done enough that we can start cooking it. I think they're actually all pretty well done. They do cook fast just because like they're all chunked. I'm gonna take my zoodles and just kind of toss them in here amongst all this. Again, this is gonna look like a lot, but it's gonna slowly kind of cook down as we add more. Just a little bit more chicken broth. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and get the chicken and the tomatoes on top of the zoodles, because now it's essentially done, right? Like you can eat a zucchini raw. But what I would want to have happen is I want all that chicken broth and just various juices from the chicken to kind of slowly soak into these. Just adjusting the heat as I see things go. At this point, you might have to add a little bit more olive oil, something like that, or more stock, depending on how yours in particular is coming out. I'm going to go back and add more of my seasoning, so like just more red pepper flakes. There. Basically, I'm just trying to compensate for all the mass that I was adding. More pepper. And then I just have some basil leaves. I like having it on the dish itself. You could also just put all the seasoning straight onto the chicken. It'd probably be a little bit easier that way, but I like kind of doing it as I go. This is just mozzarella. How much you want to use is your call. Obviously, more cheese. It's going to be tastier, but it's going to add those calories. I specifically put probably about half in as it's cooking. Try not to add too much. And then I save at least a small portion to actually serve it with the dish on top. Just because, like, as stuff kind of melts down and goes, you can easily like hide a bunch of cheese in here, and you kind of want to actually have some exactly where you want it. But it looks like we're looking pretty good. You can start to see, if I get a good section of the pan, how like the noodles begin to break down. If I look at these, they're starting to just break down, kind of like fall apart. So that's just something I want to watch. Because it's basically a game I'm playing where I want to minimize the breakdown of the noodles. I don't want to go too far, but I do want to like cook off as much of this liquid as I can. This would be a good point where I would try to make a pan sauce. That's a good way to kind of take care of this excess liquid. Like maybe not strain it, but definitely get some of the excess liquid out. Then you could say add some starch, some seasoning, some other sauces, and you could make a sauce you could then serve with chicken while also getting a fair bit of liquid out of it. Because that's something where even if I were to get this like perfect and I would reduce this down where there's none, as soon as you set it on the plate and it just kind of sits there, it's going to keep releasing more and more. So it's just something you need to keep in mind. Like, it's the one thing that's like heavily different about this recipe than something else. Like if I were to make, say, like spaghetti or something, I wouldn't run into that issue. I'm not worried about managing the amount of liquid in my dish. I just get this. Just making a point to use a different silverware now that I'm actually have cooked chicken. And now I'm just going to go here and kind of split this up. I like a lot of chicken in mine, so that's why I didn't want to do too many zoodles. But looks good. Still use this. I don't. Yeah. Section this off. I think one of the things that is also difficult about this is getting the correct amount of zoodles, because like many times I cooked this because I had to go buy zucchinis at a place where apparently my only choice was absolutely massive zucchinis. I always made this with like basically way too many noodles because it's just like, oh, well I'm going to use the entire zucchini. Like that's kind of the point, right? But I tried to reduce it back down a little bit. And I didn't end up using the summer squash for this one, which is the yellow squash. But one thing that's kind of nice about the summer squash is really it doesn't add any difference in terms of flavor, but in terms of color, it just works. Because if you look at the colors in this, particularly where you get the rind, the green portion of these zoodles, that looks great. And that's why I'm specifically trying to fish some of those out. And then if you put it in with the yellow, it just looks good. Like having that, and then you have the red of these tomatoes. It just looks awesome. It looks very trendy. Like this is, I feel like, the kind of thing you would stereotypically see on like a blog or something. So I'm just trying to go with here and build this. I could easily see if you were in a hurry, like I said, and cook this instead in a oven. What I would personally do is almost maybe serve the zoodles themselves, or not serve it, but like place those and then get the chicken on top. That way you can kind of like build this nice looking one. I also, something I think to call out while I do this is, I usually serve this with some kind of bread, some kind of toast, because again, you have a lot of liquid. If I kind of tilt to the bowl here, you can see just how much of that's building up in here. And having something to kind of like mop that up is nice. I've also heard another great way to use these is to still use regular noodles, just kind of cut the noodles with zoodles, your zucchini noodles. So you have like say half and half. That way you can still have the benefits of both worlds, like you're still making whatever recipe you normally are, but you're cutting, say, out some calories because you're using zoodles, but you aren't, say, then going to mess up the zoodles by cooking them down too much or anything like that. It's a nice little middle ground. Cool. Plus, the zoodles themselves, like once you have like a spiralizer, or if you have access to that, they're so easy to make. Like it's a big thing to break it out and do it, but it's just something I could see myself at the beginning of a week going in and just be like, you know what, I bought a bunch of squash. I think I bought 6 originally when I was making this. And I could see myself like, you know what, I'm just gonna make a big tub of these, and then whenever I need to make a meal, I'll just pull it out or something. So I just have the rest of this mozzarella. You can omit this if you so choose. but I think it's nice to just kind of put that right on there like that, kind of garnish it, make it look good. This dish does scale up pretty well for other people. So like this one, it seems like the perfect amount to, say, cook for 2 people or maybe just yourself. But it shouldn't be too hard to continue to scale it up. You could basically, I think, just split it into multiple pans where this is my like 1 chicken pan, this is my zoodle pan, and then just slowly like pull them into the main pan, dish that out, pull them in the main pan, dish them out. So you eventually get this like large, I don't know, mass, this large meal without having to, say, cook the entire thing too long because you have so much more to cook. It's just something that I want to experiment when I have recipes like this. Like, how can I do that while still getting the ease of cooking for the smaller meals? So here we have our zoodles with mozzarella and chicken. It looks pretty nice. Again, I would make a point to serve this with, say, some kind of bread, something to mop it up. It's definitely a single like piece. It's not something you would necessarily have another side with, but I think this works really well. It's really nice for like a dinner. I could see it really nice for a lunch. It's honestly, it's got great leftover potential. Like if you want to take this into work, this is like one of the things I did. I found it really handy just exactly for that, where it's like, oh, I make it for dinner. I always have leftovers because I have giant zucchini, and then, oh, I'll just package that up in Tupperware, take it to work. It's nice, it's very convenient, and then you can just use these zoodles for a couple different stuff. But it's a fun recipe. It's something I had this around because my girlfriend had it because she was into zoodles, and I was like, you know what, I want to do this. It's just a fun recipe. It's fun to just kind of like take the zucchini, mash in there, get your zoodles. You can buy them, I think, in most stores, actually pre-made, pre-cut, so you don't have to have a spiralizer. It's just a nice way to vary stuff up. Like, hey, if you're getting noodles anyway, why not just go and get some zucchini noodles? It's just a cool way to vary the recipe, and more than anything, it's just knowing that idea is out there really helps you kind of like think of more interesting ways to use in your own recipes. You're like, you know what? Why not go splurge, quote unquote, and go for the zoodles instead of the regular spaghetti or like pasta or what have you. It's like just a cool niche, fun dish to make. And I think that's the best way I can describe it. It's like, it's just fun. So anyway, I am Grant. This has been Second Plate. I look forward to maybe doing zoodles and a couple other dishes. It's just neat, but overall, I think it's always come out really well, and I like how much you can adjust it as you go. But thanks for watching.